We beat death by living while we are here. What does living mean that brings you that sense of, I feel alive? How many books has the Midnight Library sold now? 10 million worldwide or something? I love this book for so many reasons, not only because you wrote it, but also it's set on my favourite island on the planet, the Isle of Ibiza.
But my problem was that I didn't want to grow up. I didn't want to go back to London and get a real job. It became something that was very traumatising to think about. Claustrophobic feeling of panic, wanting to take my own life. Happiness only means happiness because sadness exists. Renaissance painters would use a lot of black paint and shadow just to have a look sort of like...
all glowy.
Yeah, all glowy. And it was the darkness that made the light. But one of the advantages of getting older is you've known enough bad times to actually truly appreciate those good days and those good people around you.
There was a line that jumped out at me in this book, which was the fact that you can't... Matt Haig, how lovely to see you.
It's very lovely to see you, Fearne.
It's been so long.
It's been too long, yes. I was one of the first batch, wasn't I?
Yeah, you are one of the first handful of guests on Happy Place. It was back in March 2018.
Yes.
And so thank you for saying yes, first of all, the first time round, because you were one of 5 people that said yes on the planet. So I'm really grateful.
It was a pleasure. That was a really good time to me. And being on that, I thought, I've got something to say, and it's nice that people are listening. And yeah, that was great. But I do remember getting lost on the way that time, and I still haven't remembered the directions of how to get here. So some things don't change.
That's hilarious. Well, I mean, so much has happened, and we're going to, since 2018, we'll cover some of that. But obviously, as a massive fan of yours and of your amazing writing, I've been waiting for this book, The Life Impossible, just anticipating reading this. And it did not disappoint. I loved every page, as I've DM'd you since. It's just the most stunning book. I love it.
Well, that is very lovely to hear, especially as I'm in that neurotic month before it comes out.
Horrible feeling before a book comes out, isn't it?
It is, as you know. It's you want to be this sort of totally whatever happens sort of person and fine with it in itself. And I really thought I would be with this one, because I thought, well, I've written this book for me. I've written it for the right reasons. I wasn't planning to write it. It came to me, and I wrote it away from social media. I had a sort of year break from social media. I wrote it during that time, and I was very happy with it. But obviously, inevitably, when the sort of publishers start kicking in with the requests, and you feel very out there and exposed and all of that. So that to me is the antsy bit of it. But generally, it's all good, and I'm very pleased that you've read it and liked it.
I loved it. I mean, it's a strange thing, even when you are one of the most successful authors like you are, to have an idea in your brain, to then privately execute that idea and create a tangible book. But it's such a transition going from that to then, millions of people are reading it and have an opinion about it. That I don't think you can get used to.
No, I think being a writer is totally, you're dealing with two opposite extremes, completely opposite. Because when you're writing something, especially when you're writing fiction, you're sort of documenting your own daydreams. You're sort of being, you're like a journalist just of your imagination. So you're going deeper into yourself. And then when you're published, and publication has the word public in it because you're going out there, it's the total opposite of that, and you're having to sort of convey it in a way that's totally different to writing about it. And that gear change, I think a lot of writers struggle with.
Yeah.
I'm definitely one of those. I'm not, when people say they write for themselves, I mean, that's a bit silly, because you're writing a book that's to be read by other people. So it's not like that, but it's a very private thing. And then suddenly to be totally out there is kind of disorientating.
It is. And also for people to have their own idea about what the book means, who the characters are. It's going to be a slightly different iteration to your idea, which is, again, a really strange thing.
It's a very strange thing. But that's also can be a lovely thing. And it's a way of you letting go of something you've created, is when other people respond to it, and not, positively, hopefully, but they have a slightly different take on it, or if they're casting it in their heads, they see different faces when they see the characters or any of that, and I like that. And it's a way of you sort of saying goodbye to it and putting it out in the world. But I think I've worked out over the years the way to cope with nerves when you've created something and putting it out there is to get on with something else, is to just sort of like get on to the next thing. And that's what I did. So I've been writing something else. After a long break from writing before I wrote that, I've written two very close together. So that was my way of coping. So mentally, you're slightly moved on and you're slightly protected when you're talking about the thing before.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm on to my next one as well for that very reason.
Yeah,
I just
it
wanted to
makes
be
sense.
happily distracted, quite frankly. But I think it's really important to talk about because I'm sure, like you, I've met so many people who have got great ideas for books or TV scripts or art or whatever. But there's that big block of, I don't know if I can do this, or I don't know if I'm too scared to put it out there, probably due to opinion. And I think you just have to break through it and just do it. There is no easy way of combating that fear or those feelings.
There's no way of being a writer, or hopefully a good one, without having that. Anyway, I mean, you need to have your own sort of BS detector where you know you're writing crap, or you need a bit of self-criticism as you do it, because, you know, especially with writing, because writing's only 50% of it and editing's 50% of it. So it's about what you don't include. So you need to see through your own, you know, you don't want to get too in awe of your own style or work, because that's dangerous. So you know, it's one thing where actually being a little bit neurotic or self-critical actually can help the process. But it's very, again, you've got two pulling things, because to be a creative person you need to be confident, maybe even arrogant enough to think the world needs something else out there that you're going to create in a world where there's bazillions of books out there already, but also to have that self-doubt where you can actually say, okay, I don't need to write that. I can chop that character out, or whatever it is.
It's a bonkers balance. The
It
whole
is
thing.
a bonkers balance. Yes.
It's so mad. I mean, I love this book for so many reasons. Not only because you wrote it, but also it's set on my favourite island on the planet, the Isle of Ibiza.
Yeah.
Now, last time you came on the podcast, for anyone who hasn't listened, go back and listen to that one. I'm sure if I did, I would cringe at my early podcasting technique, but hopefully I've progressed over the last 6.5 years. But obviously in that episode, we talked about Ibiza even back then, because you've got history with this island.
Yes.
Now, this is obviously, it's got a bit of everything with that sort of Ibiza energy, which we know can be super intense, good for good and bad reasons. And you've been on the receiving end of that yourself.
Yeah.
Was diving into the world of Ibiza, immersing yourself in the culture of Ibiza, the location, some sort of closure for you?
Totally. And in fact, I was, back in the 90s, late 90s, I was suicidal in Ibiza. I'd done all the partying, all the crazy stuff. But in the sort of third summer we were in Ibiza in 1999, we had a relatively normal, stable existence there. But my problem was that I didn't want to grow up. I didn't want to go back to London and get a real job. I didn't want to do any of that. So when September came around, I was going out, staying out later, drinking loads. Drugs, but it was mainly the drink with me, to be honest. And I had a job, unfortunately, where I was sat at a bar selling tickets to all the nightclubs and just getting free drinks all day from 11 in the morning. So it wasn't the ideal thing for my temperament at that point. And I ended up in a hospital in Ibiza in San Antonio and prescribed mega strength diazepam, and I was an absolute mess. And even though we'd had a lot of great times up until then in Ibiza, it then became this place that I couldn't even think about. You know, it became something that was very traumatizing to think about, because I had so many vivid memories of the worst days of my life, of this continuous claustrophobic feeling of panic, and actually, you know, wanting to take my own life at a specific location in Ibiza, which I've been to since. And that obviously took a long time to get over and process, especially because when I came back to the UK, I was still very depressed and had panic disorder for years and all of that. And in my head, one thing that helped me in the early days was to sort of blame it all on Ibiza, blame it on the place rather than the person, because the person was me and I couldn't escape me, but I could escape the place. So just putting it all on Ibiza was like, yeah, it's just like, a crazy place that I escaped from. Whereas that can only get you so far, that avoidance thing. And it took me 2 decades until I actually realised, even after I'd written things about mental health, like Reasons to Stay Alive, I'd never had proper ongoing therapy myself. And so I was offering advice to people. I was, talking about my experiences. Yet at the same time, there was a part of me that knew there was a sort of missing piece of the jigsaw that wasn't quite there. And then I, mid-pandemic, during one of the lockdowns, I got really in a bit of a state. I was drinking too much again after a long time of not drinking. I was a nightmare to live with. I was just like, I was a mess again, really. And then I realised, okay, I've got to, I've got to take this very seriously. And so I got a very good therapist who I saw on Zoom once a week, and the theme of that therapy was about facing up to all kinds of things that I've been running away from. It wasn't this kind of therapy where you end up feeling justified in everything or blaming your mother for everything or this and that. It was very raw and very exposing, and I had to sort of like do a lot of work and not find new, better excuses for things. And so fitting that theme of sort of like facing up to things, everything, I've said I need to sort of like go back there to where I nearly died and to this place that people love but I don't love because I've got all these memories. So I went out of season in April under overcast skies to Ibiza, and it was a very, very interesting experience, and it was a very cathartic experience, and it was emotional, but in a very sort of distant kind of way, because it felt like centuries had passed, rather than 2 decades. It felt like Ibiza was a very different island, partly because it is, but also because I was a very different person, and it's never the place, it's who you are reacting to that place. And the interesting thing about Ibiza, of course, is it's whatever you want it to be. It's like the Mona Lisa smile. You can look at Ibiza and see what you want to in it. So it can be a very hippie-ish, very chilled out place. It can be a very frantic, frenetic, 24/7, getting off your head sort of place. It can be a family place. It can be, like how the locals live, just a real Spanish life kind of place. So it's whatever you want. And there's a lot of nature there and a lot of beauty there. And I was interested in the island and how it itself is a place of healing, and also because it has such mass tourism, how it could do with some healing itself in parts as well. And I just thought there was a lot there. And then I had this idea of this very non-Ibiza person, this retired maths teacher who's quite stiff and buttoned up, taking someone like that to Ibiza and, having some radical transformation. That was the starting point.
Did you have the idea while you're out there?
I had bits of it. It's always hard to sort of, know exactly where it came from. But it definitely was going out there that got me that idea. And I wasn't looking for an idea. I had sort of psychologically retired, not from everything. I wanted to do stuff, but I wasn't seeing myself as a writer at that point.
Really?
I hadn't written for a year. I wanted to do something real world, like, I don't know. I had this idea, because I'd given up alcohol, and like everyone who gives up alcohol, I was very sort of evangelical about it. So I thought I'd set up a sober bar, and that was the idea of like, I know they exist, but to do one in a very non-worthy, non-earnest way, quite a hedonistic place that just happened to be sober. A sort of place that I want to go, because my whole big thing is that being British and being male and being my age and generation, every meeting place is alcohol based. Yep. And so, to do my bit to sort of like change that. So that was my idea. And then you had, every writer's fantasy of maybe a bookshop or this. And I thought, I can't do a bookshop because that's just going to make me neurotic about every other writer out there. Competitive.
Too much competition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That'd be too awkward. So, yeah, I then I thought it's not. I mean, I just had to face the fact that I'm probably not that. I couldn't run a business. I couldn't. I've not got the multitasking abilities. But I still wasn't writing, and I said to myself, I'm not going to write again after the Midnight Library unless I really want to or have a real reason to. And so I had this idea, and I thought I'll write it for the sake of writing it and see if I want to send it out to a publisher. And yeah, I did.
I think the best ideas always come when you're not searching for them. They just turn up.
Yes, and they certainly don't come when you're like staring at
God, no.
laptop.
No way.
Like Arctic blank white.
Yeah, horrible.
Thing.
Terrifying. No, they always pop up, I think, when you actually do allow yourself to have a bit of room from everything.
Yeah.
And you're just going about your day. That's certainly where I've had most of my ideas, when I've just not been thinking about anything much at all.
Yes.
But I'm sure that, you know, that trip that you've just described of going back to Ibiza for the first time, how could you not have stuff cognitively whirring? Because you was processing so much. How do you feel knowing that, you know, yes, you've had that sort of element of exposure therapy. You've been back to the island. Mm-hmm. You visited the places that in the darkest depths of your memory cause you the most pain. And knowing that, okay, it's perhaps not, it doesn't have to be as scary as you've internalised for all those years. Yet you might never 100% get over those mental demons. I don't know if any of us ever can.
No, I think sometimes like with exposure, it's about being able to live alongside it. Because I can't live in a world where that past didn't happen or that place doesn't exist. So it's about coming to terms. Like we live in a world now, for understandable reasons, because we've got a mental health crisis and we've got overstimulated left and right, where people are very conscious about triggers and avoiding things and stuff like that. But sometimes I think like, avoidance is the trigger. Like when you're avoiding everything, you end up, you know, like agoraphobic. You end up in, you know, I was agoraphobic. That was a big part of my panic disorder. Every time I went outside, I'd have a panic attack, and I used to count progress in lampposts because it's sort of like I was back at my mum and dad's house and there was like 12 lampposts for corner shop, and so, you know, when I was coming back from a shop, I was like counting down the lampposts to get back, but ultimately, it doesn't stop the panic of agoraphobia by staying indoors, because, you know, you then become scared of going somewhere else in the house, or, you know, there's always something. So at some point you have to say, well, okay, going outside is very triggering, but also there's a bigger fear. I don't want to end up like Howard Hughes, trapped in my room forever, with my long fingernails going insane. You know, you want to sort of like go out into the world. So you have to, you know, there's no comfortable route to that.
No.
If you're suddenly, you've fallen into this hole for whatever reason, and sometimes the annoying thing is you don't know the reason. I mean, part of my reason was probably I was ADHD and autistic as I've been diagnosed since. I don't sort of define myself by those things, but, you know, I've had various things about me that I didn't understand. If you have that and you don't know, it can be very easy, I think, to want to sort of like hide away, not face up to things. But you have to progress, you have to, like in the case of agoraphobia, you have to go out and know you're going to have a panic attack. And you have to get to a point where you're not as scared of that as the other alternative. And eventually your brain will catch up, or my brain caught up. I was like, well, this isn't going to kill me. This train journey is not going to kill me. And it's going to feel unpleasant. It might even exhaust me. But it's not going to, you know, the sky is not going to fall in.
And like you say, it's a more preferable route than the other one, which is doing nothing. I've so been there. And I think like, one of the worst therapies I did was EMDR, because you are totally exposed to all your worst thoughts, all your worst memories, and it's horrendous. But the game-changing progress afterwards is so much more preferable than being stuck in a place like I was mentally before having done that therapy.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. There was a line that jumped out at me in this book that relates to something you said a moment ago, which was the fact that you can't change your past. You can't go, oh, I've done so much therapy, my past doesn't exist, and now I'm free of it. You cannot. And I've got things in my past that are horrendous to look back at. And all you can do is have a level of acceptance. But the line that jumped out at me, which I think helps with this one so much for anyone listening that has got stuff in the past that they hate to look at, or things that really floor them when a memory jumps out, is this. It's a beautiful line that Grace, the maths teacher, says to the student Maurice in the books in the form of a letter. And she says, don't think of the bad times as unconnected to the good. And it's such a simple line, but it's so punchy because, you know, I can't sit here and say, oh, yeah, the bad times are unconnected to everything good now. It pains me to say that they are heavily, deeply connected to so many of the good things that are in my life today.
Yeah.
But none of us really want to give it, I guess, that weight, the bad times, or give it any energy. But there is quite a lot to be grateful for a lot of the time when you see that there are so many connections, threads that pull from the bad times to the good.
Yeah, totally. And everything is literally relative, isn't it? So like happiness only means happiness because sadness exists. And like you only see stars in the sky because the dark exists. So you can see the stars in the sky. You can't see the stars in the sky in pure daylight. And I love all those things. And there's a really pretentious art term called chiaroscuro, which is about the contrast. I did a module of art history in my at Leeds University a long time ago. But anyway, I remember chiaroscuro, which is like the Renaissance painters would use a lot, if they were doing a very religious painting, they'd use a lot of black paint and shadow in the painting to make John the Baptist or whoever look sort of like bright and
all glowy.
Yeah, all glowy and religious and spiritual. And it was the darkness that made the light. And I think that is what life is like. And I think you end up more grateful for the stuff that's not absolutely terrible when you're, you know, and you can appreciate it. And, you know, understanding the fragility of happiness sometimes, or not even happiness, but, you know, of being around people that you love and like, and the nice rhythms of life, you know that can, when you know that can sort of like go off at any moment, it can be a positive thing, knowing the negative, because you are actually grateful. And that's why you see sort of lots of, you know, you hear all the time about people who get some terrible diagnosis and suddenly that's when they learn to live. And I think, you know, as you get older, one of the advantages of getting older, and I'm a hypochondriac who has all sorts of fears about getting older, but one of the advantages of getting older is you've known enough bad times, or you've lost enough people to actually truly appreciate, in a way you can't necessarily in your early 20s, appreciate those good days and those good people around you.
Yeah, and also I think getting older does give you a time frame that allows you to look back at the darker times and see the threads to the better times. Because I think if I'd read that line 8-9 years ago, I'd say absolutely not. Nothing good has come from this period of my life.
Yeah.
But with a decade past or so, I can absolutely see it. I think time does give you that perspective.
Yeah. And I think people can get quite cross and react to that. And I think a lot of people's problems with self-help is often, it's like, oh, it's all right for you to say, or, you know, that sort of like privilege, I suppose. But it's like everyone has a life that is not one note, that you have like good and bad. And some people's lives are full of very good things and very bad things at different times. And, and often that's simultaneous. What I struggle with, and I still struggle with, because of the way I'm wired, is when there's a very good thing happening at the same time as a very bad thing. You know, how you balance and navigate that. And I think it's another thing. I think like therapy taught me is that I don't have to have all the answers to myself even, and no one has the answers to themselves. And I think in the past, possibly because when I was starting to write about mental health, you kind of adopt a role, or people perceive a role you have and you play into that role, where you're kind of expected to have the answers, rather than what I was, which was a person who went through something and tried to articulate what I went through as best as I could, and the progress I was made and why I think that happened. But I think the danger is sometimes when you're known for, as someone who people want, they want you to have answers, you can start fooling yourself into thinking you know everything about everything and you've got all the answers. And that's actually, I think that's when problems can happen. So I think it's important to always know your limitations, and that you'll never have the answers to everything. No one's ever had the answers. You know, the wisest philosophers in ancient Greece didn't have all the answers. No one has all the answers. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to work it out.
Yeah, but like you say, I mean, certainly with your book Reasons to Stay Alive, a huge lump of responsibility sort of landed on your lap due to the success of how far-reaching that book was. I mean, it massively changed my life. That book came into my life at exactly the right moment, like it did for so many people. But of course, with it, like you say, comes an expectation of answers, but also, I guess, and it's probably to a slightly lesser degree me, but with Happy Place, people feel comfy enough to come up to me and tell me things that are particularly deep and sometimes very dark. And I feel really privileged that I'm in that space, but it does feel like, oh God, I'm not a therapist. I don't know what to say here, or am I getting this right? I mean, that responsibility is huge for you.
Yeah, and I love the way you've done it though, Fearne, because I think you've created a community where people aren't necessarily thinking you've got all the answers, or even any one of your guests has got all the answers or anything, but you've created a space where people feel comfortable talking about things that they may not have elsewhere, and that's an important thing, to just create that space out there. And I think you've done that very clearly and well, in my opinion.
Thank
and I
you.
think that's good. And I suppose in a sort of like smaller way with an individual book, you try and just create a talking point, you know, that people can use as a sort of like, you know, like especially like say young blokes sometimes famously find it hard to articulate to people around them what they're feeling, but if they have a book or a film or something they can point to or give someone to read. And I think I love it when I hear those sort of things, or when I hear like a lot of the readers of Reasons to Stay Alive aren't people going through depression. They're people who know people who've gone through depression, know people who've been suicidal, people who've even lost people, but they want a window onto that. And I think that's, you know, that was something that I could give because I'd been through that. So, yeah, that's what I tried to do.
Show you what I was thinking about this chat. I've been thinking about it for a long time, not only because I've been reading the book, but also just things have popped up and I thought, I really want to know what Matt Haig thinks about this. Because someone said to me recently, and it's someone that I think is particularly knowledgeable and wise and has a sort of long history of experience working in mental health therapy kind of stuff. And I'm sure it's not their idea, but the thing that they expressed to me was that often anxiety is suppressed anger. And I've thought about this obsessively since I heard it. And I've really looked at the things that I know I'm a bit pissed off about or angry about, but I haven't accessed at all, and it's just sat there. And since I've been looking at that stuff, I'm definitely less anxious.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's like a psychosomatic kind of scenario going on, but something very incrementally is shifting due to me looking at the stuff that I'm not properly even cognizant of, that is anger down here somewhere.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? It's not even a question. It's just it's just something that I feel really interested in.
Well, the expression, because you know, talk around mental health has changed a lot since I had panic disorder in 1999. But one expression that was still there then and is still there now was fight or flight.
Yeah.
So that need to flee and escape is very related to that fight impulse. And so anxiety, like I've noticed it in my career at my more neurotic moments, and especially when I was younger and sort of struggling novelist, my anxiety around my own career, instead of really addressing what that was about, you know, look at someone more successful than me, or like, or someone I didn't like, or and I'd project my own inner insecurity onto that. I wouldn't publicly do it, but it would be in my head as a thing. And what's the use in that? That's just utterly negative thing. But it was sometimes it's easier to do that projection than to actually look at what's going on. But it's much more important to get to a place where you can look at those ugly intestines of your thinking and really know what's happening there.
And the best thing is, all of us, I think this is still this sort of strange myth that there are people out there that don't have any dark thoughts, that don't sort of internally despise other people or have weird thoughts. We're all walking around going, oh, look, they're coping so well and they're really normal. And I'm this weird freak with all these strange thoughts in my head. All of us have this.
We're problematic.
We're flawed humans. We all are.
We are. We've got, stuff going on. And so you can either deny that and, live an entire life like it's gone through an Instagram filter.
Yeah.
Or you can actually realise that, it's okay to have these sort of negative feelings. It's what becomes not okay is when you're in such denial of them that you can't see what you're doing to other people, what you can't see what you're doing to yourself, to your health, and to people who care about you, and you can't really see what's going on. So I think you've always got to have one eye on not just what you're thinking about someone or something, but why you're feeling that way. And often, you can't change external things that much, but you can massively change internal things by realizing what's going on. And sometimes just seeing, as you say, sometimes just seeing it makes you mindful of that. And I know people talk about mindfulness all the time till the point it means nothing. But mindfulness for me is literally having that awareness, that 5-second kind of check when you actually think, oh, I know why I'm thinking that about that person, or I know this is coming from a jealous place or an insecure place, and I don't need that. And
Yeah, it's a much harder route, and that's why people less often pick the route to sort of have a look at themselves. I mean, we'd all get out of it if we could, but I think if you've committed to, this is the path I'm on, you got to keep walking down it. It's the only way.
Yeah, and I'm sure you found it, but as you reach different points in your career, you realise it's quite useful to have different points in your career, points where you felt like you're a failure, points where you're externally seen as successful, because then you realise actually there's things that all this external stuff can't give you in any way.
Nope.
And actually then pushes you into a crisis, because you're like, well, I'm expected to feel this, but I don't feel this, and I've been striving towards this because I thought all the problems and insecurities were to do with not having this, but now I have this.
Yeah.
And I've got to realise the problem was something else. It wasn't this lack, I thought, this external lack of whatever, money or career or whatever. It was actually something that was always there. And the striving was just a symptom of what was there. And then I have to actually face up to that shit and just deal with it.
Because I'm sure when you were a struggling writer back in the day, that you assumed, oh, if I ever sold, like, how many books has the Midnight Library sold now? 10 million worldwide or something?
Something.
I mean, it's an absurd, like in Bookland, 10 million is absurd. Like, it's insane. It's an insane amount. But I'm sure you would have thought back then, if one of my books sold 10 million, I will be happy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work like that. And no one wants to hear that.
No one wants to hear that, because you hate yourself, don't you? You hate yourself.
No, I think it's really, Matt, I think it's so important to say this.
Yeah, no, yeah.
I think it's so important.
But I still know my younger self hates myself moaning about this stuff that younger person wanted. But I'll say that what happens very easily, I think most humans are like this, is goalposts shift.
Yeah.
So quick.
So quick.
You can be at uni and just wanting that job and getting that job, and you're just saying, you'll say before you get that job, you think, I'll be happy if I get that job. That's where my ambition will stop. I'll just be happy doing that. and you have about a week
Yeah.
before you're like, actually,
I want
wouldn't
another
it
job.
be nice to just like be a hungry hippo and just like keep grabbing and it's really hard. But it's another thing about getting older. I think once you hit, like I'm 49 years old now, and so you have a sense, whether it's real or not, of having passed over the hump in the bridge a little bit, and you think so you have a different perspective, a perspective that looks back as well as forward, and it's not so striving. And it's more about, okay, let's, instead of always going in that forward line, let's just expand out and look around and see where we're at. And that's a nice way to be than always that forward, ambitious momentum of, rat race and wanting to be respected by your peers, whatever that means. And interesting thing about the internet age is, of course, no one. When I was younger, it was possible to be naive enough to think you could be a person that everyone liked. The internet has radically shown that that's not true. There are, no people that everyone likes. And, even people that you think everyone must like this, you could find some Reddit thread or something.
There'll be someone that doesn't like Taylor Swift out there.
Yeah, no, but it's definitely true. And, so you just I suppose that's a good thing now, because everyone so knows that you can't reach that point, that we all, anyone who's vaguely public, or even if you've got an outward facing job in any capacity, you have to understand that you can people please to an extent, but you're not going to win everybody over.
No. So knowing that that's futile, as is perhaps having lofty goals about, if I sold 20 million books, I'd feel any different, or whatever the next goal would be.
Or the movie.
Or the movie.
This, that and the other.
So considering you've done all of this stuff, where do you place your happiness now? Or what does it mean to you? I mean, again, to put it into context with this book, a line that I absolutely loved was somewhat related, where Grace again says, we beat death by living while we are here. And I think that's what I mean is, what does living mean? What is it to you now that brings you that sense of, I feel alive?
I think it's weird. Like, happiness sometimes happens at that point where you stop worrying about it. Like, it's often the best moments of life are the ones that you're not thinking too deeply about. When you're in your happiest moments, you're never tweeting them, you're never Instagramming them or doing a selfie in those moments. So it's as many of those sort of natural living moments. I mean, my indulgence, and it's always been the case all my life, has been travelling. I love travel. And I think the thing I like about travel is when you're in a different country, you get a perspective, and you remember that your life isn't that important, that at any moment of the day there are people in this restaurant in Japan or Spain or America doing these things, walking down that street, there's that man in the corner busking, there's this happening 9 billion times. And I've always, since I was a kid, been fascinated by that. One of the things one of my happy memories, it's a strange one, but when I was a kid I did that thing of looking out the window as I'd be past like Sheffield or Nottingham and seeing the distant lights and imagining all the lives that were going on in that city when you were passing it on the M1 or whatever. And I love travel for giving you that sort of broad sense of a whole planet and a whole world out there, and that you're small, but you're beautifully small and part of this beautiful whole. And actually it can make you feel bigger in a sort of more Zen way, because you actually feel part of something much, much bigger than your little concerns about your little work and your social media feed and this, that and the other, but you're part of something. And I think that is where true escape and comfort is. It's never via yourself, it's via other people, other things, other places, and how you interact with them. I think we're very focused on And it's important to do work, as we've been talking about, but very focused that all the answers are inside us, and they're not. I think the way out is through other people a lot of the time.
There's something magical about when you're flying into another country, specifically at sunrise.
Yeah.
And you can sort of see the sun coming up, and you're almost imagining like people having their coffee, people making their breakfast. That always blows my mind. Like, oh my God, right down there, however many thousands of feet below, are people just sort of like having cereal and waking up, about to go and do all the stuff they need to do in their day. That is my favourite perspective shifter.
Yes.
I love it.
I can remember once my mum and dad took me. We never went on cities on holiday, but we went to Paris once. And I can remember it was like, my mum was a teacher. There was a scheme where they exchanged houses with other teachers. So we went to this Parisian teacher's flat, and just looking out in the morning at the street cleaners, of the people, and in France obviously they go to like, you know, have breakfast outside, and you can see life happening out on the streets, and it was just so sort of like spine-tinglingly lovely for someone who'd been so wrapped up in their school life and home life to just see the world out there. And I thought, I want to get out there and see something.
Yeah, but I love that we've just talked about that, and like how our happiness and our aliveness is through that connection to other people, and essentially sort of that storytelling, like learning about other people's lives and their experiences and their days. And do you find when you're writing a book, a fiction specifically, that you do have a beautiful level of escapism where you can almost park your life whilst you're writing and diving into that world?
Yeah, and I think that's for me it, everyone focuses, like when they think of writers or want to be a writer, they think of it in the bookshop and all that. The actual beautiful thing about writing, and maybe any creative endeavour, is the creating and the organising. And with fiction, what are you doing when you're telling a story? You're sort of creating a world that you have a control over, which you don't necessarily have a control over the real world, but you're creating a world full of like causes and effects that you've got sort of mastery of, and it's like it's a lovely feeling to shape that. I'm not the best editor. I'm a bit too sort of ADHD to sort of like go back through over and over, dealing with all the criticisms. But that first draft of creating something, I love that.
It is the best. I mean, I've only done it once, but I was like, it was like going on holiday every time I opened my laptop. It just felt remarkable. I mean, your fictions all have a fantastical element to them. In this one, you've got, this is not fictitious, you've got the seagrass that sits outside of the island of Ibiza. But the sort of fantastical bit is, would you call it a magic?
Yeah, I mean, it is. This is very much, I think it's my weirdest book in that, I think people will find it a bit, I mean, Midnight Library is obviously science fiction and goes off into fantasy.
Yeah.
This possibly goes a step further into life on other planets, a sort of portal that's in the ocean that connects to higher life forms. There's a lot of weird stuff, which possibly comes from having spent too long in Ibiza in my young years. I mean, my brain going a bit wild on so it's a strange, weird book, but I kind of like that I didn't, because there was a lot of pressure off Midnight Library to do, another Midnight Library, or like, I don't know, the Sunset Bookshop or something that would have been, but to just do something that's very different. Also, I think thematically quite similar, and that it's about a woman who goes through a transformation and sees life very differently and has a perspective shift. But everything else, how I get there, is kind of very different to the Midnight Library.
What do you think it is that draws you to a sort of a fantastical element to your fiction?
Because I get really, really bored. And so if I'm writing a very realistic book, after the third chapter, I will be wanting to, go with my imagination. Like, I think like we have imaginations for a reason, and it's all made up. If you're writing a novel, it's made up. So you're kind of writing about a parallel universe anyway. So why not go really made up? And also, I think having written non-fiction, it makes me want to go a bit weirder in fiction, because I realise that even in non-fiction, there are things that you can't say. Whereas in fiction, especially if you make it a real, like, fantastical, proper story, fantasy fiction, you can then be very honest about the stuff you're being honest about. You can be very, and this is one of the reasons I often get asked, like, not all my books, but the last 2 books had a female protagonist, and it's like, I want that person to be very clearly not me, and a different age and a different place, and then you can put a lot of yourself into it, and you can be very exposed and revealing without having that risk in non-fiction of hurting your parents or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's nice that the boundaries move a bit. You can really
Yeah.
kind of stretch out your limbs and go, right, where are we gonna take this? Because there are no rules. I mean, as long as you're writing in a sort of coherent way that people are gonna understand, you can really push the boundaries. It's so exciting.
Yeah, and it's fun to. I think one fun moment. It's almost like fishing. When you catch yourself thinking or going somewhere that you didn't plan. I'm not much of a planner, and so when you're imagining stuff, and then you imagine something really crazy, you think, where did that come from?
Where's that come from?
And it reminds you that you don't know yourself that much. And I think probably musicians get that feeling, and film directors get that feeling of, like, surprising yourself and understanding yourself. So in a way, writing very weird, made up stuff can be a way back to seeing yourself.
It feels like an essential practice in this day and age where daydreaming and having an imagination seems harder. We're distracting ourselves constantly, so there's no actual room to daydream. And in terms of imagination, it's like everybody's imagining everything for us in the form of AI or movies or whatever we're being bombarded with constantly, because it's hard to avoid screens, that we're not sat idle like we would have in the 80s and 90s going, oh, that's a strange idea. We almost need to work harder to give ourselves the time to really explore that imagination. And I agree with you. I think whenever I allow myself to properly daydream or just sit and see what comes up, or if I'm out walking or running, I'll not listen to anything. I'll just sort of let my brain freely wander around. And I do think it does show you something about yourself. It's almost, I feel like new parts of my brain are opening up. Like, I didn't know that existed. Like, there was a little door over here with another room that I'd never seen. So I think we all need more time just to let our minds wander and see what comes up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's no coincidence that I wrote my weirdest book when I was away from social media.
Yeah.
When I was having my mental health dip, going through therapy, I couldn't be on social media. I had my fingers burnt too much with social media. I all sorts of stuff. And I was well away. And I obviously, like everyone who says they're leaving social media, I came back to social media when I realised I've got to promote this thing now. But for a little blissful while, I'd left it. And I think that as well, because I wasn't plugged into other people's opinions, so I could actually work out what I like and my own taste, because we're all so second-guessing everyone's opinions on everything, from politics to everything. We're so worried about stepping out of line on any issue, and it's so good to sort of like step away from that for a while. And I've definitely, even though I've come back to social media, and around this I'll be sort of Instagramming a lot, but I'm a very different attitude to it now. I don't really do Twitter. I use Twitter as a sort of like mailing list, really. I don't really put as much of the sort of stuff I was putting out there anymore. So I think I wanted too much from social media. I wanted something that, because I hadn't had the right therapy, I wasn't going to get from social media. And you can never get it. Because going back to that thing about moving goalposts, social media, it preys on that from a very young age, whether it's Snapchat with their sort of like the friendship streaks, where teenagers feel like they've got to build up the streak. It's about encouraging you to always want more followers, want more, interaction, and you'll never reach the limit.
Never.
No, and there'll always be
someone bigger, someone cooler, someone more popular.
There'll always be Selena Gomez with like
exactly
77 gazillion.
It's just ridiculous. It's crazy. So post being diagnosed with ADHD, autism, now being in therapy, having had a good chunk of time off of social media, it seems like a lot's changed for you, and you're in a place where you're perhaps aware of what works for you and what doesn't. And I know that I've read even recently that, you know, much like myself, you have to always keep an eye on your mental health. I mean, most of us will have that, but you really have to keep an eye on your mental health. How are you doing that? What does that mean? Especially going into a really busy bit where you're about to promote a book.
I think, you know, for me, I'm aware now of the times of day that I'm happiest. And I'm happiest when I'm walking my golden retriever in the morning, Bruce. On Brighton Beach. And we're about to go on a little road trip with Bruce through France. Well, we're going to Ibiza and we're taking him. So I'm really looking forward to that. I think that's the perfect thing for me to not think about work. Spending time with people and animals I love, and travelling and things like that, and focusing on that. I think front and centre, it always used to be the work. And it didn't actually help the work. It didn't help me having that, you know, because you'd be doing the wrong things. And so now having a focus on the people and, you know, the sort of quieter moments, and to realise that this is it. This is, you know, life isn't something you're working towards. It's a very sort of fleeting moment in the cosmic scheme of things that we're actually here. It's the literal blink of an eye. And we're always wanting more out of it, or we're wanting the next thing or the next chapter. And we always, you know, and forward momentum is very important. But it can come a point, especially in the West, where we have so much forward momentum, we're not actually aware that this is it. This present moment, this being, this right now is it. And writing at its best and living at its best is when you're sort of lost in that moment and you're not thinking too deeply about it. You're just in it. You're just throwing stones on the beach for your dog or whatever it is, and you're there and you're here. You're like existing.
Yeah, it's the best. I had one of those days the other day where I happened to have an afternoon free, and I would normally go, well, you've got podcasts to research and you've got things to be getting on with, whatever. I thought, I'm not going to do that. And my husband was around, and we got Lime bikes and just cycled without a goal. We didn't even know where we were going. We're just cycling about, and stopped for food for a bit and then cycled a bit more. And it was I was cycling going, oh, this is like a core memory. Like, this is one of those things I'm going to think back at. Like, this is... I'm looking at the beautiful pubs and the little muses and people outside in little cafe chairs and tables. I was like, oh yeah, I'm in it. I'm like not thinking about anything else. This is it. And I just don't give myself enough space to do that. But as you say, it's all those little wonderful, fleeting, they're ephemeral moments, accidental, spontaneous moments. Yeah. That's where it's at.
Like that, well, people like say, like Darwin said, that evolution happens via mistakes. You know, when a species evolves, it's via mistakes. And I think our life's like that. It's like we find ourselves in the accidents and the mistakes and the things that aren't planned, things that are away from it. And I'm cycling. I'm going to get an e-bike in Ibiza and just whiz around, and just that's my plan.
You and Bruce on the beach, cycling about.
Cycling around.
It's going to be heaven.
Yeah. We've got a nudist beach very near us, which I'm not going to partake in, but you know, it'll be a way of sort of like taking myself out of it with lots of nice German men.
Well, look, it's always. It's been an absolute joy catching up with you. This book gave me just the best sense of escapism and lots of lines that I've written down that I'm going to look back at again and again. And I wish you all the love and luck with the promotion and the success that will follow from this wonderful book.
Oh, it's lovely chatting to you, as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.